Okay, let's talk about historical narrative. Historical narrative is written in indicative statements of developing a story, usually about giving an exposition. This is the background of the story, sort of like Once Upon a Time. This took place, and then a crisis happens. The big bad wolf comes to town, and then there's a climax. The three little pigs, they do their thing, and they build a house of bricks. And the resolution is, the big bad wolf huffs and puffs and can't blow the house down, and the conclusion is that the little pigs live happily ever after. So that's the idea of narrative presents itself in scenes. Sometimes the narrator, the author as narrator, is telling us of the scene, but very often we're put into the action in the moment. He's presenting the background information, then of who and where, who's talking, who's meeting together, and then there's a crisis of some event taking place, and all of a sudden they have to do something about it. Then there's a climax, there's a resolution, and a conclusion. And these scenes will be put together, even into strung together into acts and even cycles of, like the Samson cycle. You have multiple acts within Samson's story because he's got a larger story arc going on. And so these scenes are set up sort of like on a stage where you have the account unfolding. The narrator is off to the side at a podium, and the light comes on. The narrator says, "This is what's taking place." The light goes black, and then you have the light showing up on the stage, and two characters are there, and they're talking, and you know who the narrator's just told you who's there, and so Samuel's talking to the people, and the people talk back to Samuel. And then the narrator says something, and then the people go away, and Samuel's now talking to Saul, and they have a back and forth and that sort of thing. So it's sort of like a play, the way the scenes in narrative present themselves. There's also embedded songs. Hannah has a song, as Noah has a song in Deuteronomy, and Miriam has a song. So there's plenty of songs. There's parables at times, even in the Old Testament. Gideon's son gives one. So there are different features, literary features, and that sort of thing within these narratives and scenes, but they all have a central idea. There's a central point to them, and they have a theological direction. They're trying to teach something. There's also sorts of ancillary things we get from these, but there is a central idea to these, and you need to look for that. Now, when we talk about history, history is really not what you have in history books. The Germans have a term, Historie, with an I-E, and this idea of history from the Germans is just the facts. I mean, it's not any spin, it's just the facts, and it's all the facts. Well, you can't write a history of all the facts. Can't write a history of Fort Worth from yesterday. There's just too much. There's not enough paper in the world to write a history of everything that happened yesterday in Fort Worth. So just in one small town, there wouldn't be, because there's just too much taking place. So what happens is historians, even newspapers, they select certain things. Certain things are most important. The editor says, of the local newspaper says, hey, this story is important to me. It's important to our community. We're going to talk about the water board and what the water board says about water rights. We're going to talk about this local ordinance that's coming up that the city council, and we're going to talk about this major crime that just happened, and we need to deal with that. So they're selecting events to talk about. Why? Because that's what's important to the editor, and he's assuming it's important to the people of that town, Fort Worth. Well, the editor and the writer of Scripture does the same thing. What we have in Scripture is not history, okay? It is historiography. It's not that it's not historical. It is historical. It is a historical event, but it's a selective historical event, just like an editor selects certain things to talk about. Historians, or the writers of Scripture, have to select certain things. They can't say everything about everything. They have to say certain things about some things. So they select what they're going to talk about. And by the fact that they're selecting, this is no longer a true history, it's historiography. Every history book's a historiography. It's all selective. It shows the bias of the historian and the historian's bias. And we have all these revisionist histories coming out saying that, a revisionist history of the Revolutionary War, saying that our founding fathers really weren't so religious and they weren't sort of this or sort of that. They're trying to revise the common modern viewpoint of the early founding fathers of America by revising the history and their viewpoint of what they select, what they talk about. There are those that want to do this of David and call him a murderer, traitor, and adulterer. And he was those things, but the final spin is he repented of the sin and he followed after God. So there is a spin and a bias in what you talk about. Everyone is biased. There's no one who is without bias. There is no lab coat. There is no degree which conveys an unbiased viewpoint. Everyone is biased. It really comes down to which is the best bias with which to be biased. That's where it comes down to, because everyone's got a spin. The Bible's got a spin. I have a spin. You have a spin. And we're all spinning it all the time. And we're all basically trying to persuade our viewpoint. We all have rhetoric. That's, the art of persuasive speech. We're all doing that. And the art of persuasive writing. The author of Scripture is doing that in narratives. He's writing these texts to teach, to present God's viewpoint on the events, and to teach us through the events. He's elucidating details. He doesn't just throw out details in the text. They're there for a reason. So if you've got some odd detail, why does, you need to ask the question, why did God put that there? What is the author trying to tell us about the situation, about the person, about the event, by having that piece of data there that just doesn't seem to fit? There's some reason for it. It's not there for just aesthetics. It's there to instruct or to shade the meaning of and the understanding of the event. And again, these are historical events. It's just the author is highlighting certain parts of them. He's not saying everything about every event. Boy, it would be nice to have everything of every event, because I love history. I like to know exactly how things laid out. I would love that. But Scripture doesn't give us everything. It gives us a spin. Theological spin, yes, but that doesn't mean it's not accurate. It is accurate. So again, historical events in the text are given from the viewpoint, eyewitness viewpoint of those who saw these things. So sometimes when you have two witnesses on two sides of the street seeing the same event, their viewpoint shades the way that they understand it. You can have a car driving by at night, and one side of the street there's a halogen light, and on the other corner there's a white light. At night, under a halogen light, a blue car looks green. Those orange halogen lights. But on the other side of the street, with a white light reflecting on the car back toward that person, the car looks blue. So if the police come and ask both eyewitnesses, what did you see? One sees a blue car, one sees a green car. They're not lying. They actually saw that. But the eyewitness viewpoint for each, while different, is accurate. And so that's what's happening with the text at times. Now, Paul writes about this. When he talks about narratives, he talks about the Old Testament narratives, and he said these things were written as an example in 1 Corinthians 10. They were written for our instruction. So he's talking about these texts. These texts of Old Testament narrative are written to instruct us. And we need to take care to see what's the central idea. We want to preach the central idea. Sure, there's tertiary things that you can talk about, secondary and tertiary things that are perhaps good, right, interesting, but you want to make sure you cover the main idea first, or you're misusing Scripture by not covering the main idea, by leaving it out. So you want to take care there. There is a great distance between us and the events of the ancient Old Testament people. But this does not mean that this distance in time is inaccurate, that the events are accurate because of that. Moses is writing about creation, and that just because he's writing millennia after creation does not mean that it's not accurate. He is actually standing, as we've said before, he's standing or kneeling before God in the Holy of Holies and the holy place in the tabernacle, and God's telling him how to write, what to write. And it's God's spin on the events that are prehistory to us. So is history important? Of course it is. Does it matter that certain things happened in a certain way in the past? Absolutely it does. Because if you can't say that if the resurrection didn't happen, that it wouldn't change our theology of why are we even here as far as at seminary or at church. It does matter that Christ came in the fullness of time, that he lived a perfect life, that he died a voluntary death on the cross, that he rose victorious from the grave and sits right at the right hand of the Father. That is a historical fact. According to Scripture, I believe it according to my faith. And if you don't believe that, then you've got a serious problem on your hands. So history is important. The history of the text is important. We also have, again, if we talked about other literary forms, but if we have other literary forms, just because it's a song doesn't mean that it's not historical. It's just, again, an eyewitness viewpoint that has a broader swath, a broader brush, that sort of thing. Now, when we come to the unit analysis, how do we analyze narratives? We're looking at the scene. Scenes happen when you have the narrator talk, says this is taking place, gives an exposition, an introduction. Then he says, okay, this person's, something happened to Samuel, and someone came to see him, and then the climax of the scene, Samuel goes to God, and then the resolution of the scene, Samuel comes back to the people and tells them what God says, and then thus everyone went home, and Samuel starts looking for a king. So you have this sort of thing take place where in the mode of a scene, just like a play again, the text is laid out and you have the center of the scene that is usually a speech, and it's usually given us the central idea of what the author is trying to highlight about the history there. So in unit analysis of Old Testament narrative, you're looking for the scene again. You're looking for the break of units, and usually geographic location is a break. Let's see here. Let me go to where to break units. Look for pronominal suffixes, a change in those. He to they, or that sort of thing. You want to look at formal introductions. These are the generations of Adam. These are the generations of Israel. These are the generations of Judah, that sort of thing. These are in the book of Genesis called Toledot, or generations. And these sorts of statements can break the text. There are key phrases. These are the journeys of, or these are the kings, or thus saith the Lord. These sorts of statements break the text. Recurring phrases. The sons of Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord. These types of recurring phrases break the text into sections. We look for thesis statements or summary statements. Thus, Abijah slept with his fathers, and all the acts of his acts are found in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. Those types of summary statements. Changes in literary style. When you go from prose narrative to poetry, all of a sudden there's a song. Well, that says, well, hey, I need to look at the song differently. Conclusions, any kind of a concluding statement, or a cycle. You got Abraham talked about in multiple chapters. So you have all of a sudden then you move on to Isaac, and you talk about Isaac's scenes and sections and that sort of thing, or Jacob, or Samson, or Elijah, or Elisha. They all have cycles. In other words, there's lots of scenes and acts around their life or lives. There can also be a text surrounding an event like the Exodus. And so you have the plagues coming and the encounters with Pharaoh and all of that. So they're about the Exodus event. Then it could be just a change in topic. They're talking about one thing, and then they start talking about something else is taking place and something else is going on. There are time indicators in the text that can also break a unit. You have Cyrus's reign talked about, or the reign of Artaxerxes later in the books of Nehemiah. Again, geographical indicators. Israel in the wilderness, marching through and different places. They come to a new place. That's a new scene. Change in speaker. If you have Job talking in the book of Job, and all of a sudden one of his friends is talking, well, and then you have a different friend, that can be a change in the scene as well. So, how do we analyze then these units once we break them? Well, once you've identified the sections or breaks, you want to look for a summary. So you know there's a break. This starts here. Well, then you're looking for the other end of it, the back end of it. And as you look at that, when you find that, you're looking for what is the introductory material? What is the inciting moment? What about this scene is that causes the action, the middle action, the central action, the climactic action to take place? What is the key element that happens? Something has to happen for a story to need to have a climax and a resolution and a conclusion. So you're looking for those. You're looking for what's the that central idea then in that climax. What's that theme of the central theme or main idea of the text? Or is there some theme going on in the greater section of the greater act, like the whole issue of Solomon? It's about Solomon and his building of the temple, and you've got several scenes that are talked about with his building projects. and they all go together. And so maybe that's the central idea, but the next scene talks about it a little bit differently, his payment of Hiram. The next scene talks about his building of his own houses and Pharaoh's daughter and things like that. So they all add together. Basically, in narrative books, it's my affirmation, I hold, that you have a central idea for the book, that each section of the book upholds that central idea for the book, and each act upholds the central idea of that section, and each scene upholds the central idea of that act. So basically, it's like a mobile where you pick up the central string and the main idea, and everything else is balanced and is swirling around like those mobiles when you're a kid and you make a mobile in school and you bring it up and you hang it up in your room and that sort of thing. And so that's what I'm looking for as in the narrative books as the way to analyze it. There is a big picture in these books, like in the book of 1st, 2nd Kings that we're going to be covering. The central idea is, why are we in exile? It's literally written to the exiles, to those who are in Babylon. And the center of the book of 1st, 2nd Kings is the Elijah-Elisha cycle. And so the whole idea of the prophet Elijah on Mount Carmel, that's the center idea of the book. It's Yahweh versus Baal. This is why you're in exile, because of your idolatry. You said you'd follow me, and you didn't, and you got kicked out of the land because you didn't follow, because of the covenant curses in Deuteronomy. You didn't follow the covenant. And so there's a central idea of the book, and I'm looking for those scenes to support that central idea. So this is how you analyze a book and analyze the different parts. It takes a lot of reading, a lot of backing off, and looking at it, the big picture, the whole book. So you really want to read. If you're going to analyze a narrative book, you want to read it multiple times, 20 to 50 times. Read it and read it and read it and read it. This is when Scripture starts the washing of regeneration of Scripture. As you read it, you start to see things that you didn't see before. You start to see connections, and you see how this text seems to follow or fit the preceding text, and how it all supports each other. And the author is actually moving somewhere. He's not just telling stories. He's actually moving somewhere, and he's selecting and he's presenting his accounts in a way to teach something. He's trying to speak to his audience. And so that's what we're looking for, to be able to then take from the text what's in the text, not to impose upon the text, that's eisegesis, but to exegete, to bring out of the text what's in the text, and not to bring out of it what's secondary or minor, but the main idea. There's a lot of secondary things that will support and you can your sermon and the outline, and you can preach them, but you want to preach the main idea, not the secondary ideas. So that's it. I've got a whole lot more that we could cover, but you'll have to come take me for Hebrew exegesis. And to get your Hebrew, and come take me for that, or even an English Bible class. If we covered a book, English historical book, then I will cover some more of the details. There's a whole lot of questions that you can ask of the text. It's like an inductive Bible study on steroids. There's all sorts of questions that you can ask of the text that help you elucidate what's going on. And just like inductive Bible study is who, what, when, where, why, and how. And basically, you're just asking questions of the text. And there's so many more that you can ask that once you understand those questions, as you read, you start to ask those questions. And as you read, not all of them apply, but many of them do. And when you answer those questions, you start to see what the author is trying to do. And that's really interesting. So you'll have to come back and take me for, again, an English Bible class, or maybe take your Hebrew and take an exegesis class with me, and I'll cover those more because they're in great detail. It would take me a couple of class periods to go into more detail, and here we're just surveying. So look forward to next time. We'll be covering the book of Joshua. Take care.